Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
All right, go for it. Okay, as I was saying, Kevin and I do a lot of things together. It's a kind of a collaboration on the water to a certain extent. But, the technology is there. It is what it is. The actual technical aspects are being enhanced whenever I come up with something that's useful. We also have certain ingredients, let's say certain things that will affect the frequency or the signal that comes out of the machine, along with just the machine itself. Excuse me. So I just got through taking some oxygen, which I do twice a day because I live up here in about a mile into the air, and sometimes I get a little bit of reaction from the oxygen. So if I cough a little bit, I'm not ill. It's just that the oxygen will sometimes irritate my sinus cavities. Anyway, the bottom line is we come up with things that we think are logical, and we try those. If they don't work, even though they douse out okay or they muscle test okay, we try them. If we see that there's a deterioration in the signal, Kevin and I are both relatively sensitive to things that don't work, even though they seem to work at first. We just toss them and go to the next thing. Usually, there's an addition to the machine signal at least once a week. There's something outside of it just being moved up in power, which many of you might notice has been happening on a very regular basis. The basic machine there are two sources of energy for the water machine. One is the machine itself, which is an excellent basic energy. The other one are other energies that are added into it. The basic energy carrier remains relatively the same, but the energy that's coming into it is being enhanced regularly. So what we're doing is the water signal is, for all intents and purposes, going up and up and up in power all the time. Some of you that are more sensitive may have noticed this. So we're increasing the power, and we're increasing the quality of the signal all the time. A little bit hit and miss, a lot of thinking about it. And fortunately for me, I think, Kevin has been around this type of work for a long time, and he's fairly well cleared of negativity, so he has a high level of sensitivity. And I'd like to think my level of sensitivity is okay, too. So what we're doing is we're watching and feeling all the time what maybe some of the less experienced people would not feel right away, but feel as an overall signal and a sense of positiveness about what's going on. I'll give you a little idea of how this thing, and of course, anytime Kevin is welcome to come in and add anything because he has plenty to say on the subject, being that he is a massage therapist along with his other vocations, and then he understands the effects of water very well, I would say. What I would say for myself is that there are certain aspects of the water signal, and again, there are two things that we're doing here. The first thing we're doing is we're producing a signal that's etheric. And the etheric signal comes from the original machines, and that etheric signal goes to infinity. The energy envelope that comes off the human being goes to infinity. It never stops. At least in my opinion, it never stops, and I've tested it out for long distances. I can feel people moving in and out of my auric field. The auric field goes out in concentric rings, as far as I can tell, infinitely. So making the assumption that that's the case, I'll tell you how I figured that out. You can normally feel that on an electromagnetic spectrum, like, say, energy coming off a flashlight or energy coming off of a electrical field, that it will dissipate at 1 over the radius squared. That's a standard physics thing. Every physicist, every chemist, anybody that's ever taken physics knows that 1 over r squared is the dissipation rate at which a field ceases to exist. This field does not, as far as I can tell, and I've checked it out as carefully as I can, it does not dissipate at 1 over the radius squared. It doesn't dissipate at all. It just goes out the same. So I'm making the assumption that this signal is the same strength on Venus that it is here. There's no way for me to know that. but to the best of my knowledge, once the idea of 1 over r squared is violated, it simply means that it really doesn't dissipate. Now, there are certain fields that don't dissipate. And as I have mentioned on things before, on presentations before, there are torsion fields or scalar wave fields that don't dissipate. And this would be a field like, for instance, a bunch of cue balls lined up on a pool table. You can tap one cue ball if they're all touching, and then cue ball at the end will pop off the other end. That's a torsion field, so that it's affected the same no matter how long the length of cue balls is. If you tap one on one end, it'll affect it on the other end. So torsion fields aren't affected like a 1 over r squared field is concerned. And I don't want to get into physics. Let's just say that this is what I believe is going on here. This torsion field, I believe, does not stop at 4-dimensional space. It actually works in the physical plane all the way out to 6 dimensions, the last 2 of which are almost completely out of the understanding of most physicists and chemists because they can't measure it. So what you're seeing here is a very strange phenomenon. Now, for those of you that are movie buffs, there was a movie that came through the United States, a documentary, I believe it was probably a year and a half ago, called Water. And the movie was actually produced in Russia. My son and I both went to that movie at a little exotic little Valley Art Theater down in Tempe, Arizona, where strange movies are played. And this one was a documentary about the effects of water and how water is affected by things. And what it talked about was how water, even on a person that was hundreds of miles away, the water molecules that are affecting one person can also affect the other person. Very similar to the quantum mechanics discoveries with electron spin, for those of you that are familiar with those. And so at a distance, there is a field, there is a matrix that takes these things and moves them into these multidimensional spaces of which we have no real complete knowledge. So what we're doing here is we're producing a crystal of water. And the water crystal is essentially, it's a very, very sensitive, water is a very sensitive substance. It is not held, there are these little H2O molecules conglomerate in a water droplet in crystals that are between, say, 50 and 200 molecules, all connected electromagnetically through what are called van der Waals forces. A water molecule has a negative charge, which is the oxygen molecule, and a positive charge, which is the hydrogen molecules. The way that works is the oxygen is highly electronegative. When it bonds with the hydrogen, it strips an electron off of the hydrogen, of both hydrogens, and holds the electron closer into the electron pattern of the oxygen, which then exposes a positive field on the hydrogen atom. When the electrons come in closer to the oxygen negative field, it produces an excessive negative charge, and that's why the oxygen atom has a negative charge to it, while the hydrogens have a positive charge. If they go into a solution that is highly electropositive, then the electrons begin to flow freely around the solution, and you have an acidic solution. If the solution is highly electronegative, the electrons are held close to the molecule, and you have a basic solution rather than an acidic one. Now, if they don't go off, even in an acid or a base solution, these things are still conglomerating as little crystals. They're like little magnets. The positive hydrogen connecting to the negative oxygen of another water molecule. So even in a highly acidic solution, only a tiny fraction of the hydrogen ions are going out there and producing an acid, or in a basic solution, only a tiny fraction of the OH molecules are going out to produce a base. I don't want to get carried away with this, but let's just say the bottom line is the water crystal remains intact whether the solution